My family looked me straight in the eyes and called me a liar. They said I was jealous, unstable, and desperate for attention. They laughed when I begged them to believe me. But the day hidden security footage finally surfaced, every accusation they made against me shattered in seconds, and the people who betrayed me had nowhere left to hide. Stick with me while I share my story, and if it touches you, don't forget to support our channel by hitting that subscribe button, dropping a like, and sharing it with the people you care about. My name is Brenna Holloway, and until recently, I believed that family would always stand by each other when it mattered most. I grew up believing that if I worked hard, stayed honest, and put the people I loved first, everything would eventually fall into place. I was wrong. I'm 32 years old and live in a quiet town in Oregon. I have always been the kind of person who takes responsibility without being asked. If someone in my family needed help moving, I was there. If my parents needed someone to drive them to appointments or fix something around the house, I made time. Birthdays, holidays, family dinners, I rarely missed any of them because I truly cared about keeping us close. The strange part was that no matter how much I gave, it never seemed to be enough. My older brother, Keelan, lived by a completely different set of rules. He made careless decisions, broke promises, and somehow always found someone else to clean up after him. That someone was usually me. If he forgot something important, I stepped in. If he created a problem, everyone expected me to smooth things over. Our parents, Corwin and Aloan, never seemed to notice how unfair it had become. They always had an excuse ready for Keelan. They called his mistakes bad luck or said he just needed another chance. Meanwhile, I was expected to stay quiet, be understanding, and never complain. For years, I convinced myself that keeping the peace was worth it. I told myself that one day they would finally see me for who I really was instead of only seeing the dependable daughter who could handle everything. Looking back now, I realize I ignored too many warning signs because I wanted so badly to believe my family loved me the same way I loved them. Then one ordinary family gathering changed everything. I walked into that house expecting another normal evening filled with food, small talk, and familiar faces. I had no idea that before the night was over, my honesty would be questioned, my loyalty would be attacked, and the people I trusted most would turn against me without giving me a chance to explain. That was the moment my life began to fall apart. When I think about how everything happened, I realize it didn't begin that night. It started years earlier, when I was too young to understand why I always felt like I had to earn love that was given so easily to someone else. As children, Keelan and I lived under the same roof, but we grew up in two very different worlds. He was praised for the smallest things. If he finished a simple chore, my parents celebrated him. If he brought home average grades, they said he was doing his best. Every little success was treated like a big achievement. Things were different for me. I studied hard, stayed out of trouble, and did everything I was asked to do. Good grades were expected, not celebrated. Helping around the house wasn't appreciated because it was simply what they expected from me. I kept waiting for the day my parents would notice how hard I worked, but that day never came. As I got older, I stopped asking for recognition. I focused on doing what I believed was right instead of hoping someone would thank me. After high school, I wanted to go to college. Money was tight, so I found a part-time job and applied for every scholarship I could. I worked long hours, attended classes during the day, and studied late into the night. It wasn't easy, but I was proud that I was building my future with my own effort. At the same time, Keelan received financial help from our parents without having to ask twice. They paid for his classes, covered his bills, and even gave him extra money whenever he wanted it. More than once, he dropped courses or walked away from opportunities that many people would have appreciated. Still, my parents always believed he deserved another chance. I never understood why different rules applied to each of us. There was one person in the family who seemed to notice what was happening. My aunt, Marcella Vaughn, watched quietly over the years. Sometimes she gave me a kind smile or asked how work and school were going. I could tell she understood more than she said. But she almost never spoke up when my parents treated Keelan differently. Maybe she wanted to avoid family arguments, or maybe she believed it wasn't her place to interfere. Whatever the reason, she stayed silent. Even after all those years, I never became bitter. I believed honesty mattered. I believed hard work would eventually pay off. Most of all, I believed families should stay together through good times and bad. I carried those values with me into adulthood, never imagining they would one day be tested in ways I could never have expected. The anniversary dinner started like any other family celebration. The house was full of warm food, quiet music, and conversations that mixed together from every room. Relatives laughed around the dining table, while my parents greeted everyone with smiles. I helped carry dishes into the kitchen and made sure everything was ready before we all sat down to eat. For a while, everything seemed peaceful. After dinner, people split into small groups. Some stayed in the living room talking, while others went outside to enjoy the evening air. I noticed my father step away for a phone call, leaving the hallway empty. A few minutes later, I saw Keelan walking toward Dad's office. It caught my attention because the office door was usually kept closed during family gatherings. At first, I thought maybe Dad had asked him to get something. I didn't think much of it. I was looking for extra napkins in the hallway closet when I heard a drawer slide open inside the office. The sound made me glance toward the slightly open door. Before I realized what I was seeing, I watched Keelan take a thick bundle of cash from the desk drawer. Then he picked up a folder filled with important papers and slipped both into a bag he had brought with him. I froze where I stood. My heart started racing because nothing about what I was seeing looked normal. I stayed hidden because I didn't know what to do. A moment later, I heard another voice coming from just outside the office. I couldn't see who it was, but I heard enough to understand the conversation. Keelan spoke in a calm voice, saying that if anyone noticed the money was gone, someone else would end up taking the blame anyway. The other person sounded uncertain, but Keelan laughed and said nobody would ever question him. Those words made my stomach drop. This wasn't a misunderstanding. It sounded planned. I waited until the hallway was empty before quietly walking away. My hands were shaking, and I couldn't focus on anything happening around me. Part of me wanted to leave immediately, but another part believed there had to be a simple explanation. I kept hoping I had misunderstood what I saw. Still, I knew I couldn't ignore it. If money and important documents were missing, my parents deserved to know before things became worse. I didn't want to embarrass Keelan in front of everyone or start an argument during the celebration. I believed the right thing was to speak to my parents privately and let them decide what to do. I took a deep breath and waited for the right moment, convinced that telling the truth was the best way to protect my family, even if the conversation would be difficult. I waited until my parents were alone in the kitchen before speaking. I told them I needed to discuss something important and asked them not to react until they heard everything. My voice was shaking because I knew how serious it was. I carefully explained what I had seen and repeated the words I had overheard. I wasn't trying to accuse anyone without reason. I only wanted them to check before anything became worse. My father stared at me for a few seconds without saying a word. Then his face hardened. My mother looked disappointed instead of concerned. Before I could explain further, Dad called Keelan into the kitchen. The moment he walked in, he looked at me and then at our parents. They asked him about the missing money. Without showing even a second of panic, he looked shocked and hurt. He asked how anyone could believe such a terrible story. Then he turned toward me with tears in his eyes and said he couldn't believe his own sister would make up something so cruel. He told everyone that I had always been jealous because our parents trusted him more. He said I wanted to ruin the anniversary by creating drama and turning the family against him. His words came so naturally that I almost couldn't believe what I was hearing. Instead of asking questions, my parents accepted every word he said. My mother told me she never expected this kind of behavior from me. My father accused me of trying to destroy the family over my personal feelings. Their voices grew louder, and soon relatives began walking into the kitchen to see what was happening. Before I knew it, everyone was listening. Keelan repeated his story, making himself sound like the victim. A few relatives shook their heads at me without asking for my side. Others looked away as if they were embarrassed to even be standing near me. Every attempt I made to explain was interrupted. No one wanted to hear another word. I felt like I was standing alone in a room full of strangers instead of family. Then my father pointed toward the front door and told me to leave. He said I wasn't going to ruin their special day with lies and accusations. My mother agreed and said everyone would be happier if I just went home. Those words hurt more than I can describe. Before leaving, I looked across the room and saw Aunt Marcella. She met my eyes for a brief moment. I hoped she would finally speak up and tell everyone to slow down and listen. She knew I wasn't the kind of person who made up stories. But she lowered her head and stayed silent. That silence hurt almost as much as the accusations. I picked up my purse, walked out the front door, and closed it behind me. As I sat in my car, tears filled my eyes. I had walked into that house believing honesty would protect my family. Instead, it had cost me my place in it. The days after that night were harder than I expected. I kept reaching for my phone without thinking, then stopping myself before calling anyone. No messages came from my parents. None of my relatives checked to see how I was doing. It was as if I had disappeared from their lives overnight. At first, I hoped someone would calm down, think about what had happened, and ask to hear my side. That call never came. After waiting longer than I should have, I finally accepted that I couldn't keep living with false hope. I decided to put all my energy into building a life that didn't depend on people who had already chosen not to believe me. I stayed busy from morning until evening. I volunteered for extra projects at work and spent my weekends catching up on things I had ignored for months. Keeping my mind occupied helped me avoid thinking about everything I had lost. Some evenings were still difficult. I would drive past places where my family and I used to meet, and memories would come rushing back. But instead of turning around, I kept driving forward. Little by little, I started creating new routines that belonged only to me. While I stayed away, I heard small pieces of family news through people who knew us both. I learned that Keelan was acting more confident than ever. He carried himself like someone who had nothing to worry about. Since no one questioned his story, he had no reason to be careful. He continued living exactly as he always had, believing the past was behind him. Around the same time, my father began dealing with unexpected financial problems. More money had gone missing, and some important paperwork couldn't be found. I only heard about it because an old family friend mentioned that Dad seemed stressed and distracted lately. Even then, he refused to believe Keelan could have anything to do with it. Instead, he blamed poor record-keeping and bad luck. Hearing that made me realize nothing had changed. They still preferred comfortable excuses over uncomfortable truth. I never tried to contact them again. I wasn't angry anymore. I was simply tired. There comes a point when defending yourself only creates more pain, and I had reached that point. If my own family could look at me and assume the worst without asking a single honest question, there was nothing left for me to prove. I slowly accepted that I might never be invited back into their lives. That thought used to frighten me, but with time it became easier to live with. I focused on becoming stronger instead of waiting for acceptance that might never come. I couldn't control what my family believed, but I could control the life I chose to build from that moment forward. Even though I didn't know it yet, the truth was quietly waiting for the right time to reveal itself. About 2 months later, something happened that no one could have planned. My parents had a home security system that had been installed years earlier. Most of the cameras were used every day, but a few had been forgotten because they covered parts of the house that rarely needed attention. During a routine system upgrade, the security company found a problem with the old recording storage. They contacted my father and explained that they needed to review and organize archived video files before completing the update. At first, it sounded like a simple technical issue. My father agreed without giving it much thought. While sorting through the old recordings, one of the technicians noticed footage from the night of the anniversary celebration. The camera had been placed at the end of the hallway, facing the office door. It had continued recording even though everyone had forgotten it was there. Since the system had never been fully checked after installation, no one realized those recordings still existed. The technician reviewed the video to make sure the files weren't damaged. What appeared on the screen immediately caught his attention. The footage showed Keelan walking down the hallway while everyone else was gathered in another room. He looked around carefully before entering the office. A few minutes later, he came back out carrying a bag that looked much heavier than when he had walked in. Before leaving the hallway, he stopped, looked both ways again, and quietly closed the office door behind him. The recording continued. A short time later, I appeared in the hallway. I wasn't carrying a bag or touching anything inside the office. I simply walked past after stopping for a moment near the hallway closet. Everything happened exactly as I remembered it. There was no confusion and no missing pieces. The timing on the video proved that I had entered the hallway only after Keelan had already left the office. Another section of the recording showed him returning once more to adjust a few items inside the room before joining the rest of the family, as if nothing had happened. Every movement looked careful and planned. There was no innocent explanation for what the camera had captured. The technician immediately contacted my father and suggested that he personally watch the recording because it appeared to contain important evidence. When my parents finally saw the video with their own eyes, there was nothing left to argue about. They watched Keelan remove the cash, take the documents, and quietly leave before I ever came near the office. The story they had believed for weeks fell apart in just a few minutes. No one had to guess anymore. No one had to choose between different versions of the truth. The camera had quietly recorded everything, and every lie that had been spoken against me disappeared the moment that forgotten footage began to play. After seeing the recording for themselves, my parents asked several close relatives to come to the house. They didn't explain the reason over the phone. They only said it was important and that everyone needed to be there. Aunt Marcella came along with a few family members who had been present during the anniversary dinner. Keelan also arrived, looking relaxed and completely unaware of what was about to happen. Everyone gathered in the living room, while my father connected the recording to the television. No one spoke much as the video began to play. At first, people watched quietly without understanding why they had been called. Then the camera showed the hallway and the office door. Keelan appeared on the screen. As the video continued, every person in the room leaned forward. No one looked away. They watched him enter the office, leave with the bag, and return again exactly as the recording had captured. When my father paused the video, the room became completely silent. It was the kind of silence that feels heavy. No one knew what to say because there was nothing left to question. My father slowly turned toward Keelan and asked him to explain what everyone had just seen. For the first time, Keelan had no answer. He opened his mouth but couldn't find the words. He looked around the room as if hoping someone would defend him the way they always had before. This time, nobody did. My mother sat with tears running down her face. She kept staring at the television as if she wished the recording would somehow change. Aunt Marcella lowered her head, unable to meet anyone's eyes. The relatives who had judged me so quickly looked embarrassed and ashamed. Some remembered the harsh things they had said about me that night. Others remembered watching me leave without offering even a single word of support. They finally understood that the person they had accused was the only one telling the truth from the beginning. My father admitted that he had never even considered the possibility that I was being honest. He realized he had trusted one child without asking questions while refusing to listen to the other. That realization hit him harder than anyone expected. It wasn't only about the missing money anymore. It was about the choice they had made when I needed them most. They had judged me before looking for facts. They had protected a lie because it was easier than facing the truth. Now they had to live with what they had done. The recording had answered every question, but it also created one that nobody in that room could answer. How could they ever face me again after treating me like the enemy when all I had tried to do was protect my family? After that day, everything in the family changed. My parents started calling me again and again, but I didn't pick up right away. I needed time to process everything I had been through. Every missed call felt like a reminder of how quickly things had fallen apart and how long I had been left alone without anyone checking on me. Eventually, I answered one of their calls. My mother was crying the moment I heard her voice. She kept saying my name over and over, asking me to come home or at least meet them. My father spoke too, but his voice sounded heavy and tired. He told me they were sorry and that they should have listened to me from the beginning. After that, more relatives began reaching out. One by one, they tried to explain themselves. Some said they were confused that night. Others admitted they followed the crowd without thinking. A few of them openly said they felt ashamed for how quickly they judged me without asking a single real question. Aunt Marcella called me privately. She sounded emotional and told me she should have spoken up when I was being blamed. She said she saw the situation going in the wrong direction, but stayed quiet because she didn't want to create conflict in the family. Hearing that hurt more than I expected because it confirmed that someone did notice the truth, but still didn't stand up for me when it mattered. Then came Keelan. At first, he tried to deny things, but the pressure from everyone around him became too much. There was no way for him to explain what had already been seen. Eventually, he admitted what he had done. It wasn't a dramatic confession. It felt more like someone giving up after realizing there was no escape left. Once he confessed, things moved quickly. My parents spoke with professionals to understand the situation. Financial records were checked again, and more problems connected to his actions started to appear. The consequences he once believed he could avoid were now becoming real. I listened to all of this from a distance. I heard the apologies, the explanations, and the regret in everyone's voices. But something inside me didn't change. I understood their sorrow, but it didn't erase what I had gone through. For weeks, I had been treated like someone dishonest, someone untrustworthy, someone who would hurt her own family for no reason. Now that the truth was clear, Everyone wanted forgiveness. But what stayed with me most was the fact that none of them believed me when it mattered. They only understood the truth after proof made it impossible to ignore. That realization stayed with me longer than any apology ever could. After everything settled, people in my family expected things to go back to normal. They assumed that because the truth was finally clear, I would simply return and take my place again like nothing had happened. Some of them even started talking about fixing things quickly, as if hurt and trust could be repaired overnight. My parents tried to convince me to come back home more often. They said they would make things right and support me in ways they never did before. They also mentioned financial help, as if money could somehow replace everything that had been broken between us. But I didn't respond the way they expected. I listened, but I didn't agree to anything that would put me back into the same position I had before. I had spent too many years being the person who stayed quiet, helped everyone, and carried responsibilities without being seen. I wasn't willing to step back into that role again just because things had finally come to light. I told them clearly that I needed distance and time. I wasn't making decisions out of anger. I was making them out of self-respect. For the first time in my life, I chose my own peace over family expectations. I focused on rebuilding my life in a way that didn't depend on approval or validation from people who had already shown me where I stood. I kept my boundaries firm even when some relatives tried to push back or convince me to forgive and move on quickly. I didn't argue with them. I simply stayed consistent in my decision. I stopped taking calls that only brought emotional pressure. I stopped engaging in conversations that made me feel like I was being pulled back into the same cycle again. Slowly, I started building a life that felt calm. I put more energy into my work and personal growth. I met new people who treated me with respect instead of expectation. I learned how to enjoy my time without constantly feeling responsible for everyone else's problems. Over time, something unexpected happened. My silence and distance began to affect the family more than any argument ever could. They realized I was no longer available whenever they needed someone to fix things or support them emotionally. The space I created made them notice how much they had depended on me before without appreciating it. My absence became a constant reminder of what they had taken for granted. I didn't need to argue or prove anything anymore. My life itself showed the difference. I wasn't trying to punish anyone. I was simply choosing not to return to a place where I had been ignored for so long. And in doing that, I became someone they could no longer overlook or control. Months passed, and life slowly started to feel different in ways I never thought possible. I stopped waking up with that heavy feeling in my chest that used to follow me for weeks at a time. My days became simpler, more structured, and surprisingly peaceful. I focused on my work, built a stable routine, and spent time with people who treated me with patience instead of expectation. For the first time in a long time, I felt like I was living a life that belonged to me and not one built around fixing problems for others. My parents still tried to reach out. Sometimes they would send long messages, sometimes they would call late in the evening, hoping I would agree to meet. I didn't ignore them completely, but I kept my boundaries firm. When I did respond, I made it clear that things could not go back to the way they were before. I told them forgiveness doesn't mean forgetting what happened. It doesn't mean returning to the same patterns that caused so much pain. It means understanding the truth and choosing how to move forward carefully. My father seemed to struggle the most with accepting that. My mother often sounded emotional, saying she wished she had listened earlier. But wishes couldn't change what had already been broken. Keelan's situation was very different. The consequences of his actions followed him quietly but steadily. He wasn't part of the family conversations anymore in the same way. There was tension and distance wherever his name came up. The trust he once had was gone, and rebuilding it was something no one could rush. I didn't focus on his life anymore. That chapter had already shown me enough. What mattered more was what I was building for myself. I noticed how different everything felt when I was no longer trying to earn approval from people who had already decided how they saw me in the past. There was a strange clarity in stepping away from all of that. One evening, I sat alone and thought about everything that had happened from the beginning. I realized the security footage was never just about proving innocence. It revealed something deeper. It showed how quickly people choose belief over truth when it is easier for them. It showed how silence can hurt just as much as words. Most importantly, it showed me who actually cared enough to question things and who only stood close when it was comfortable. The truth didn't just expose one mistake. It exposed patterns, choices, and hidden loyalties that had been there all along. In the end, I understood something I couldn't see before. Family isn't just about blood or history. It's about who stands with